time they say heals all wounds, but it's not always true in all cases. Almost every African country was a victim of colonial atrocities in the hands of foreign powers who first arrived to colonize the African continent, be it in form of slave trade or otherwise. Namibia, Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda, Liberia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, just to cite this few, endured these colonial atrocities. Meanwhile, in that light, 5 mixed-race women demanding reparations from Belgium after being taken away from their families in the Democratic Republic of Congo 70 years ago took their fight to the Brussels Appeals Court on September 9, 2024. The women accused the country of crimes against humanity over a colonial-era practice that saw them taken from their families and placed in institutions. The 5 women, now in their 70s, accused Belgium of crimes against humanity in their native Democratic Republic of Congo. In 2019, Belgium apologized for kidnapping these thousands of mixed-race children in the DRC between the years 1959 and 1962 in a move to address the legacy of its often brutal 80 years of colonization. However, we recall that 2 years ago, when Belgium's new king, Philip, visited the DRC, he reaffirmed his deepest regret for exploitation, racism and other acts of violence during his country's colonization in the DRC, but again stopped short of formally apologizing. We were expecting reparations, cited opposition member of parliament Genevieve Nangozi from the DRC, a call that resonates with calls made by numerous pundits across the African continent. Indeed, this day our question lies: is this a means to an end? Ladies and gentlemen, join us as we evoke this question around colonial atrocities with our guests in the studio this day. It's a talking point. Thank you for joining us. Stay with us. It's a new day, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this day on Talking Point over For You Media Africa. Like we mentioned in our preamble, today we're discussing colonial atrocities. Of course, in that regard, Belgium has been dragged to court, and a happening that took place on Monday, September 9, 2024, where, of course, mixed-race persons actually accused the country of committing crimes against humanity. To evoke this topic of discussion this day, where we ask the question, is this a means to an end? We've been joined by Professor AKUHMBOM, who is an author, a Pan-Africanist, of course, the author of the book Africa's Dilemma, Our People on a Crossroads to Choosing an Identity. Thank you, immensely, Prof, for taking our time to join us this day on Talking Point.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today to talk to Africans about colonialism and its effects on our people. It is a sad situation to realize that you are born in a family and you end up not knowing your mother nor your father.
Absolutely.
Because the colonial master decided to separate you from your mother, and your father refused to recognize you as a child. Growing in such a condition, and might be in an orphanage or growing in a foster home, doesn't in any way give you an identity as an individual. This falls back on the pages of my book, which actually is out to explain to Africans where we are and how we can be able to pick up and become who we are supposed to be, irrespective of the number of years that were stolen from us, irrespective of the fact that our identity was in one way or the other taken away from us. We are a people, and we have an identity, and we are supposed to stay on that identity. And anyone who attempted to destroy that identity needs to pay for it when it is time to pay for it.
Absolutely. Like we cited, they say time heals all the wounds, but it's not always true. And you mentioned that amidst all these atrocities that were being committed against the African people, it's imperative for Africans to realize that they are one people. They have an identity and they have to stand by it. Now, in the case of the Democratic Republic of Congo, where we've seen a mixed race persons actually dragged the Belgian government to court as far as accusing them that they have committed crimes against humanity. When you look at the atrocities we saw King Leopold in the days of during colonization, with what he perpetrated in the DRC, or better still in today's world we'll name as the Democratic Republic of Congo. Could you, in a bit to elucidate and enlighten our audience, what were some of those atrocities that the Belgian government perpetrated in DRC?
You know, anytime I see it and I think of the impact of colonial rule in Africa, I feel devastated, and I feel like Africans are not being looked upon as a people. Why am I saying that? It's because just imagine the crimes that were done in other areas of the world. You realize that when time comes, those cases are judged and reparations take place.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to Africa, it seems as if the slave trade that took place had no relationship with our time. The colonialism which took place seems as if it was a kind of aid that Europeans were giving Africans. But I will tell you what happened. You see, we are talking here about the Belgian Congo. Leopold, as a king, decided to own the entire Congo as his property. It was his personal property. Mm-hmm. And the people of Congo were properties to him and not people. Implying that everything that was in the Congos belonged to him.
Yeah. From
humans or animals to everything.
Including the land.
Including the land. And during his reign, I'll tell you, there are families with individuals with chopped arms because they did not respect, or maybe were not able to pay the colonial tax. Let me just use that word, which was meant to be paid. Or maybe if you were caught stealing what belonged to the king, which is what you are working, your arm was cut as a means to discipline you.
Yes.
Apart from that, millions upon millions, over 30 million Africans were killed under Leopold. I want to use if you want to go to look at the official figures, there should be more than 11 million, but I'm saying over 30 million for a reason, because not every individual that died was documented.
Yes.
And so the killings of Africans by the Belgian king Leopold was something that was like official. And I am surprised that they are talking about crimes against humanity and they never looked into that. I think even if the Belgian king is not there to be judged, the entire Belgian kingdom was supposed to be brought to book. And reparations were supposed to be done in order to soften the hearts of a lot of people. We are talking here about little children that were born, they are our parents today, yeah. But those were children that were born between the year 1945 to 1950, 52, 55. And when Belgium was about to get its independence, Congo yes. was about to get its independence, most of these children who were born first, I want to use the name rape cases, where white raped black women, gave birth to children that were métis.
Race, yeah.
Yes. And as a result of that, these children were being carried out. In fact, forcefully taken away from their mothers.
That's what they meant by placing them in institutions.
Yes. So, forcefully taking them away from their mothers, because as they were being taken, it's not like they were taken to be given to their fathers.
Yes.
There were none of their fathers who came up to own up of them. But they were seized up, handed over to institutions like orphanages and other institutions that were created, which never actually treated them like equals with Belgians, yes. And gave them bad treatments. And as a result of that, if you see some of these women, 5 among many of them, coming up today to say, okay, we are taking the entire kingdom of Belgium to court for reparations, I think the Belgians should not have even allowed it to go to court. They should have. And what they are asking is nothing, because I saw is the sum is, one of them is asking about 50,000 euro.
Yeah.
That's nothing.
As compared
That's
to
nothing
what
as compared to what
the Democratic Republic of
as
Congo.
compared to what she went through. I don't want to put the entire Congo, because if I want to talk about that, I don't think that Europeans should be able to talk anywhere where we are as black people.
That's why we always say that time sometimes might not be able to heal all those wounds.
Yeah.
And it's really saddening that we're having this conversation, but we're looking at these ladies because they went through cases of racism.
True.
And much more you've highlighted, but then they're asking for restitution. Do you see this happening anytime? So you cited that this is not the first time we're seeing a European country, or better still, any country in the West being, say, dragged to court, or better still cited or linked to these issues of colonial atrocities, but yet nothing is done as far as restituting the African continent is concerned. So do you see this happening anytime soon? Do you think that this plea made by these women is actually going to be fulfilled?
You know, the fact that these women are just 5 of them coming up to ask for reparations, the truth is, if they kind of succumb to these 5, they'll end up succumbing to the entire Africa. So they are going to play over it and the case will die down. But I think this is something that African leaders were supposed to be the ones championing it.
That is true.
It's true that there is no amount of reparations that can actually pay the damage that has been caused to the African people. Because as we are talking right now, Africans seems to have been freed from colonialism, but mentally they are still enslaved. They are colonial. I want to show you, if you have read through my book, you will discover that culturally we have been enslaved. We have been colonized. Today I'm talking in English, I'm speaking English. English is not the official language from Babanki, from Kejom. I'm supposed to be speaking Kejom language here, not English language. I was forced with this language. I was forced with it because they came to us that we were speaking, in quotes, animal language, which implies what they call dialects. A multitude of sounds that are made. That is an insult in the first place. If you want to look at the map of the entire Great Britain in the world as compared to the world and the empire that small tiny nation controls, you ask, what did they use? What was their force that a few group of people colonized almost half of the world? In Africa, they came here, we had our languages, we had a civilization. They decided to interfere with our civilization, impose their civilization. They came up with what we call cultural ethnicity and decided to
separate,
take away what belonged to us, force what they had on us, then told our people, if you want to be civilized, you need to become like me. And forced that upon into their throats, and they swallowed it. It was a hard pill. And so today, if I sit here and I'm speaking in English, I am actually not doing good to myself as an African. But that's the world in which we live in right now.
And that's what we're always advocating for, common language.
And we have accepted this colonial position. And today, it is a taboo, a shock, that if you do not know how to speak English, people laugh at you from Africa. An African would laugh at an African speaking English language when indeed he cannot even speak his own language. It's a crime. When you hear a Chinese man make faults in English, you don't laugh because you know it's not his language.
Yeah.
When an Italian speaks English and he doesn't speak it well, you don't laugh. The same with the French. But the question is, you coming from Bafut and you are speaking English language and you don't speak it well, and I laugh at you. That tells me mentally have a problem. Yes, and that is one of the effects of colonial impact. That's the colonial impact on us. The effects are so hidden in us that you might feel like, no, this is me, I'm free now. You are not free. You are not free. I just use the language. What about the way of the way we think? The way an African man used to think is different from the way we think today. We think so individualistic. The Africans never thought individualistic. They were communal people, and they thought from a communal base. They never thought as individuals. Today, the same philosophy that says it takes a village to raise a child is no more holding in Africa. Why? Because today, if I see you talk harsh to my child, I get angry. Where did that come from? That is colonial impact. So the impact is so heavy, my dear, that at times I sit and I ask, do Africans really know what they have been brought into? Do they actually realize how far they have been taken deep into the soil? Would they ever come out of it? Practically, the world will never be as it used to be and the way it was supposed to be because of colonialism. And so, at the end of the day, I think that those who are supposed to champion this particular fight are happy about the condition in which they find themselves in, and as a result of that, they don't even have the time to do that. And I think if they had decided to build up the Africa we want, then they would have gone in to ask the people of Leopold, pay us back. And not only the Leopold, you know, let me just narrate something for the African man to understand. Do you know the so-called treaty, whatever, the conference, Berlin Conference, that held in 1884, 1885?
Yes.
That conference was held because of what was happening in the Belgium, in the colonial Belgium. Let me call it colonial Belgium in Congo.
Yes.
When other colonial masters were invading the land and stealing, or might be getting what was found in Congo, the natural resources, the Belgian king thought it was his property, so he had a problem with it, and they almost started a war in Africa. They were fighting one another in Africa, and it all happened that the Belgian king had to call the Kaiser of Germany to organize a conference to solve the colonial, let me say, the tribal problem which was happening. So you realize that the Berlin Conference was not a conference to colonize Africa, but it was a conference organized to solve tribal problems among Europeans. So it was a tribal conference to solve tribal problems, not for the colonization of Africa. And so when they came to that conference, they had to say, okay, you have been interfering in the king's portion of land. You have been entering into this place. So let's do something. We are going to share this land for ourselves, so that you know where you are, you end and where I end. And that is where the partitioning of Africa came into. But a lot of people think that it was, well, it was not for colonialism. It was for them to better sap out the material resources from Africa for their own good and civilization, not for the good of the African man. So a lot of people hold it until our children are being deceived in school, saying that the conference was organized for the purpose of the partitioning of Africa for a better colonization or better civilization of Africa. Is a lie. It was not for the civilization of Africa. It was for the looting of Africa. That conference was organized to organize their looting in Africa, and successfully they did, and break out Africa among themselves like a piece of bread shared among equals without an African involved. That's why Africans were not called to that meeting. And I'll tell you, Ethiopia was not a colony. Was a free state. It was a free state in Africa. They were not called. They were never called there. And that particular setting, I will tell you, is the same follow-up that created the League of Nations. It's the same follow-up that created what they call the United Nations. All those are follow-ups of that particular sitting. So the League of Nations was not created for the good of Africa, it was created for the good of the West. The United Nations was not established for the good of Africa, it was created to still bring peace among Europeans and to help them strengthen the hegemony of Africa. And they have succeeded. And Africans abuse this sitting and saying, oh, the United Nations. That is why there is no African nation having a permanent seat. When you get to the security, the United Nations Security Council, so, yeah, there is no permanent seat given to an African nation. Why do you think so?
And that was a question we were asking just a few days back. Now, you unearthed a lot of facts, which is in line with today's topic of discussion. Now, in line with your book, People at the Crossroads of Choosing an Identity, how does that relate when you look at present-day Africa? Given the atrocities that have been committed in the past, when you see Africa where it is today, do you believe that Africa still has that opportunity, it still has that chance of, choosing, or better still, preserving its identity?
One of the things I would tell you is, irrespective of the fact that I hear say that Europeans actually have done a lot of damage in trying to destroy the identity of the African people, I won't go to say we can't fix it. We can fix it. We can fix it. Why? Because what remains of our culture and our identity is found in the hinterlands. And true leadership in a nation should focus in building a curriculum for our schools that relate with our very culture and identity. The question is, do they actually know what our identity is all about?
That is it.
And that becomes a problem, because the identity of a people is based on their cultural realities. The question is, what is our cultural reality? Are we Europeans in Africa, or are we kind of Europeans, or say Africans, New Africa? I want to say, if I have to respond to this question, I need to go back right to pre-slavery
era.
No, pre-slavery, before talking of the colonial area.
Yes.
Because the slave, you know, today we mix the two. The international slave trade had little or no purpose attached to helping the Africans, was not for colonialism. That particular international trade was meant for one purpose: the development of Europe. They needed raw materials and they needed workmanship, so the manpower to build their civilization. And they found a very vast market of free slavery, in fact, free labor. And that was Africa. So they came down to Africa to collect a lot of young Africans who were having the energy enough to work, took them to the United States to build. So the United States is built on the strength of our ancestors. Brazil is built on the strength of our ancestors. Europe is built on the strength of our ancestors. Some people want to argue that, but they have tangible facts and proofs of it. And when they did all these, enslave our people to the moment when the industrial age started, when they created the first machines that could do the work that the slaves were doing, then they said there's no need for slaves anymore. That's when Great Britain came up and say the abolition of slave trade. Yes, they abolished the slave trade, and this time was because they had the manpower, or let's say they had the machines that could do the work that humans were doing. So you didn't need the humans anymore, and so they had to stop that. But they still needed a market to sell the goods that were being produced from their industrial revolution. They also needed not only the market, but they also needed a kind of raw materials that will kind of empower their industries for more productivity. And so they said, let's go back to Africa. Africa has everything that we need. And so they had to officially send their priests to come, missionaries as they call them, to enter into Africa and try to use a more diplomatic and a softer method to cajole our people in believing in the good that is coming from Europe, in believing in the white man and all that. And successfully, they gathered our children and successfully did that. You know, during the period of colonialism, which was a second phase of the looting of Africa, because the first phase of the looting of Africa was the slavery. The second phase was colonialism. When this second phase was actually established, like I said, they used missionaries and the church as the goal before to make the ground softer, before coming with administration. And when they successfully took up Africa, created their hegemony around Africa, at this moment, they knew it was their property. So they looted Africa, and they are still looting Africa now, because we are in a state of neocolonialism where it is happening. And after they looked at it and said, okay, we are giving you your independence, but now we have taken enough, okay, we want you to lead. They know you cannot.
But up to date, Africa is not truly independent.
You see, that's where I'm coming. They know they are giving you something that you will not be able to handle. You will depend on them to handle. Because they are the ones who told you, you are now independent. A person who wants to be independent does not need somebody to give him independence. He takes it by force. What happened in Haiti was true independence back in the 1800s, in the late 1900s, when Haiti got up and said, no, enough is enough. The French have been maltreating us, and they fought, drove away the French and took over. That is what it meant to be independent. But the problem is, will you manage what you did not establish?
Exactly.
So they gave us something that we didn't know. That was not the system of governance that we knew in Africa. First of all, they did something. They picked a few of us, went to Europe, trained them to know, do the things the way they do. That's brainwashing. Do things the way they do and not the way you do. Then send them back to us and say, okay, we are giving you your independence. Okay, we signed a piece of document and say we have liberated you from us, but you have to depend on us. Because if you actually want to move ahead, you cannot move without us. So they give you the rope. In fact, they're like giving you a goat. The rope is in their hands, and you are thinking you have a goat, but they can pull it anytime they want.
Yes, exactly.
And that's what they have been doing. And look at it. You want Africa to develop? Africa can't develop without being economically independent, without being truly politically independent. As long as Europeans think that Africa is their property, there's no way that Africans will own Africa with them having that kind of mindset, except we put up a fight, and a true fight. That's a simple way out of this thing. But if you think that they'll just come and they'll say, no, you guys are free right now, you can do what you want. Why is it that when they were colonizing China, they didn't pick out Chinese people out of the entire China and carry them to Europe and dump them there for them to become Europeans? They kind of why didn't they take away their language? They struggled to impose English on the Chinese people.
But it didn't work.
What happened? They had a strong desire for their own. What happened with Africa? The brainwashing worked fast, because first, they first of all made us slaves and showed us guns and frightened us. We were afraid. And some people say that if there was slave trade, Africans are to be blamed for slave trade. No. Africans never knew slave trade. They were not selling people. I can give you, if you enter my book, you will see proofs, situations where, especially in Congo, during the days of the Portuguese, where they came and showed the Congolese kings during those days that you can become like us, and they were happy about it, wanted to be like them. And then a situation will happen, a king will say, okay, I want a mass for my people. You know what the priest asks? The priest says, I need slaves. Slaves were the price for this. So if the church could be asking for slaves as a price for a mass to be offered, what do you think that is? That should tell you it was in their system. The church has empowered slavery itself. And that's why if you get into the Bible, somewhere they tell you that a slave should be happy to be under his master. He should submit and be obedient. An obedient slave. Wow, that's beautiful. So just imagine how we're conditioned. So if I see an African say that Africans are their true problem, yes, we might be our problem only because we have a mind that has been damaged. And our minds have been damaged.
Yes, I remember you said something that before Africa can become truly independent, it needs to be economically independent. Now, we're looking at the colonial atrocities that took place in the past. When you look at Africa, present-day Africa, you notice that the continent is having or reeling with a debt crisis. When you look at this debt crisis, for instance, do you think, or do you share the opinion that some of, say, this neo-colonialist era could be extending this debt crisis that Africa is facing and it's yet unable to get out of it?
You see, I wanted to say something about let me just say about the third phase, the fourth phase of building the European hegemony in Africa. If you look at the fourth phase, you realize that there's something for the Europeans to maintain their hegemony around Africa. They came up with, they call it globalization. I'm sure you know that very well.
Yes.
Globalization. Wow. The world has become a single small village. Question: why is it that they didn't globalize the world when they were building their own civilization? When they claimed that they are giving you independence, they wanted to have direct impact on your economy. They said the world is global. So they brought in globalization and accept free business. You can freely leave Europe to come and do business in Africa. It is damaging towards the economy of the African people. And that's why there is much of dumping in Africa. Africans don't have anything they can sell to Europeans, but everything that is dirty, everything that is bad, everything that is abandoned in Europe is dumped in Africa. And that is the reason why the giant businesses in Europe will simply enter Africa and kill the small entrepreneurs that are in Africa. So how do you expect the economy to grow when the so-called free market is there out there, when the European big boss can sit somewhere with vast business, with a lot of money, choose to come and create a company near yours, a young startup, and kill your business in a single day, and we call it globalization? No, that is not needed in Africa. If Africa needs to be involved in this globalization, let them allow us to build our civilization and our economy. Then when we are giants too, then we can now
sit on the table,
sit on the same table, also become part of the global world. But as long as that is not happening, Africa is going to remain in a state, in a beggarly state. Africa is supposed to remain in a dependent state. And so we want to see an economy that is developed. And just of recent, most of our presidents left Africa, went to China, a continent, went to sit with a nation to beg for crumbs. Question that we should be asking ourselves: do we really know what Africa is? Do we know what Africa is? It is aching to realize that even our so-called leaders do not even know the importance of this continent. that just imagine about 54 nations will go sit in front of one young Chinese leader, and he's telling them this, and then at the end of the day, you say, I have loans to give you, but I can give you a lot of loans. You give them pieces of papers that have no impact and end up wanting their raw materials. How many times have China wanted to own airports in Africa, wanted to own gold mines in Africa, wanted to own lands in Africa for the debts that Africans are owing them? And you know what? Those debts keep on. They keep collecting them when they know they can't pay. And the question is, what are these debts we are talking about? Money that you don't see where it goes to. It doesn't impact the African man. Individuals collect the money, they come sit on it, and end up causing the African on the street to pay this debt when they don't even know how these debts were used. Okay, look at it today. I want to use Cameroon as an example, where we are looking at a road that has been for close to 12 years, the expressway that is supposed to be established from Yaoundé to Douala. When you look at that expressway, can you even accept for 1 second that that expressway is an expressway that has not been accomplished or completed for how many years? More than 12 good years. It is still there. So I feel devastated when we as Africans are thinking that we can economically become actually having this kind of leaders that we have. You see, I want to be plain on this. It is true that we might blame colonialism for the kind of state of mind in which we have, where we think that we are beggars, where we get to think that maybe we need a particular amount of money to be equal with others. But I also want to say that we need to come back to ourselves and take responsibility of what happens to us. We can blame people, ask for reparations from them for the past, but if the present is not our responsibility, then it means we have decided to remain children. And I don't think I want to be a child. That is why I wrote the book, Africa's Dilemma, a people at a crossroad to choosing an identity, because I want the African man to understand that you can build a new identity for yourself. You can become a better version of yourself. I want the African people to understand that the responsibility to become who they want to become is in their hands. It's no more in the hands of the Europeans. As I said, if you want to be free, then there is need for you to take over your freedom. You fight for your freedom. You declare yourself free, not by necessarily sitting and waiting for somebody to write piece of papers and say you are a free person. This to me is enough to declare that the state in which we find ourselves today, we partially are responsible. You know, I used to give 80% damage to the West. They are 80. I used to say the damage that we are facing today, they cost 80% of it. But I want to also say that it should be now 50-50, because this is over 60-something years since they allow us to manage ourselves. I don't think we had actually decided to come sit together as a people to recorrect the problem. There is a reawakening that was supposed to have taken place in Africa for the people to gain their consciousness, because we were induced into a state of unconsciousness through the European educational system, through the slave trade, through the colonial system that was brought. All that induced us into a state of unconsciousness. But we need to be conscious. The responsibility of being consciousness is not found in the hands of the colonizer. It is found in our hands. And if we choose not to do something with this opportunity we have been given in the name of independence, then we have chosen to remain slaves forever. That is the reason why we go back from them. We go to Europe to ask for aid. What kind of aid? Africa is practically helping the entire globe. But we end up saying that we are going for aid from Europe. We are going for aid from China. We are going for aid from all the different nations, Indonesia and others. How comes that this same nation, I remember in the early 70s and 80s, Africans, I want to talk of Cameroon. Cameroon used to actually help and give aid to South Korea, to give aid to Indonesia, to give aid even to China. What has happened that between 1980 to the year 2024, China is assembling the entire Africa in front of them to give them aid. Korea is giving aid to Africa. Indonesia is giving aid to Africa. Where are we? Where did we miss it? We have decided to remain slaves in our minds. And until that slave mindset, that colonial mindset, that beggarly mindset is scrapped out of us, we will remain beggars and we'll keep begging and begging. And so I think it is time for the African people to do good to themselves by actually taking time to invest in themselves. Get to identify yourself. The question Sharon, you asked about can we possibly get to rebuild a new identity for ourselves? I would say yes, because that identity is still found within us.
Absolutely.
The identity of the African people has not been destroyed. It is true we have been colonially damaged mentally, but our identity still remains intact. I think it is time for us to go back, build from the base. And that is why in my book, I give a proposal on how to build a new Africa out of the crumbs that we have remaining right now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for elaborating on that. It's worth noting that, ladies and gentlemen, if you just are joining us, today we're discussing colonial reparations, or better still, colonial atrocities, where we've seen several pundits as well as ladies from Belgium dragged the Belgian government to court as far as that is concerned, for them to be able to bring back restitution. Of course, we're discussing these, and it's in sync with a statement made by a Democratic Republic of Congo's a member of parliament, Genevieve Nangozi, that stated that they were expecting reparations. And of course, this is in line with what's been happening on the African continent. I recall a statement made by Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo that stated that the African continent indeed needed reparations. It could not just be linked with slave trade, but it could be linked to other colonial atrocities, which Professor AKUHMBOM has cited so far. Meanwhile, while we are unpacking this topic of discussion, in line with what the Ghanaian president said, Prof, now when you listen, you listen to, or you watch and you get to observe present-day Africa as far as, say, in line with the colonial atrocities is concerned. When you look at the continent, do you think Africa is indeed ready for these reparations?
Ready. You see, I still have a problem with the fact that even if we are given the opportunity right now, and might be Europeans say, okay, we are going to give you, let's say, $5 trillion for the damage that we cause. What impact would that money have on Africa? Because if we have people who are leading our various nations who do not care about Africa, but they care about their stomachs. I mean, we are talking of beggars here, sitting as leaders. We are talking about individuals who think that materialism is all. Do you think that the $5 trillion will create any impact in Africa? It would do nothing.
Nothing.
Why? Because these same individuals will steal the money and put it in their pockets.
Especially with the numerous crises that are ongoing on the continent.
So, at the end of the day, do we really need reparations? Africans need mental restoration. Africa needs to be awakened. I am not one of the fans for reparations. I'm one of the individuals who believe that Africa does not need material, because we have all the material resources we need in this continent that can transform this continent to make it a giant. I'll remind Africans, the population of Africa is a youthful population between the ages of, the average age of the African is between the age of 17 to, let's say, 17, 19. The average age. Okay, which means it's a youthful population. And we are made up of about 1.3 billion people in the entire continent. And if you have to look at it, we have the largest land surface in the world, and 60% arable unfarmed land is still found in Africa. What does that imply to you? We have the labor, we have the land,
yes,
and I think we have the
mineral,
and I think we have the capital. So can we transform our continent, our economy, to become a giant economy? Yes, we have the potential. The potential is there to transform Africa into a multi-trillion.
The minerals, the human capital.
Yes.
And it's
the material capital, the human capital, all that is there. For us to be able to transform all this and make it a giant economy, we can do it. But the question is, what is stopping us from doing it? You get to realize, I come back to my point, we have a problem with leadership in Africa. And the problem of the leadership in Africa is tied back to what I spoke of, mental slavery. We are mentally enslaved. And we look at things the opposite way. I mentioned earlier in our discussion here, and I said, the Africa we have today is a shadow of itself. It's not the Africa that was. The African man had never thought from an individual position. Capitalism had never been the African system. That's an imposed system and a borrowed system, which has created a serious impact on the African mindset. And today we think material, but that is not what will build the Africa that we want to build. That goes back to tell you the identity of the African man can never be built on the identity of a foreigner. And so struggling to make Africa great by using Western and European, should I say, model, will never be able to give the African identity that we are expecting. We'll never be able to build the kind of economy we want. So Africa needs mental restoration, not material restitution. When we accept that we had been damaged, if we accept that, and we need them to also accept that we know that
yes,
our people destroyed your people, destroyed your lands, killed your people, that accepting it gives us a place from the beginning.
That's what we mean by formal apology,
yes,
actually.
So we need them to do that. It is true in 2019, the Belgian politicians actually told the Congolese that we are sorry for what happened, but that is not enough.
Exactly.
I'm not saying that because I said that's not enough. I'm saying that they should give money. It's not. I heard the one of those women in Belgium asking for 50,000 euro. I said, 50,000 euro? Is that enough? Is that enough? You don't know if your grandparents were killed and you were not opportune to see them. You don't know if your own mother, after they took you from his hands,
she was killed too.
Was killed. So you asking 50,000. That should tell you material. You see the beggarly mindset? It is there. So we get to think that might be the small crumbs that we are asking for is what is going to help us. No. If we are mentally restructured, mentally restored, that the European cannot do for us. That is a spiritual activity that Africans are supposed to do on their own and by themselves. Yes. So we must be willing to accept the realities on the ground and say, yes, this has already happened. And choose to say we have to step from this and become a better group of people, a better people than we had always been. Instead of living beggarly and asking for crumbs always and thinking that those crumbs are going to make us become. You know, when I talk like this, some Africans feel like, okay, no, we deserve it. No, I am not saying we don't deserve it. We might deserve it, but what will it do if we have the same mindset that we have? Don't forget this. A lizard in Africa will not enter a plane and become a crocodile in America. It will never happen. It will remain a lizard.
That is true.
Except something mysterious happen, something spiritual happen. So even if they give you millions, billions,
and there's not a change of mindset,
and the mindset remains the same, you have not changed. Everything will go down to the drain. And so Africa, we have a lot of work to do. The education, that is why I keep on blaming leadership, because our education is the base. We keep on, what our children are being taught is the same colonial education that we received, the same colonial education that our parents received, the same colonial education that was brought to us. And
we have highlighted on several occasions that it needs to be a revamp.
There is need, not just revived. We need to overhaul the entire educational system, create an educational system that is particularly related to our realities here. I remember when I was doing geography and we're studying fishing in Norway, lumbering in Norway. The question is, how could that be related to
fishing in Africa, or better still fishing in the northwest region of Cameroon?
Oh, you talk about, so how does that relate with the circumstances in which I am facing? And that is why we claim that we have gone to school, but we come back, we cannot do anything. As a professor, you are supposed to be more. But our professors in Africa, and with writing pieces of papers, publish them, then we are unable to put what we say on the ground. We do not have proof of work. We are philosophers. And philosophizing will not build Africa. That is why Africa needs a practical strategy and a practical step towards its own development. And if Africa will become economically independent, as I mentioned earlier, which was the dream and desire of those who sat down in Addis Ababa in 1963 to start the Organization of the African Unity, which was the predecessor of what we call today the African Union. Kwame Nkrumah and some of those who sat in that meeting had one vision. We need an independent economic Africa, an Africa that is economically empowered. And there, during that meeting, I remember Kwame Nkrumah reminded African leaders seated in that meeting that day that if Africa does not unite now and build its economic standard strong enough, he's seen a more severe colonialism that is coming, and it is going to be economical. Are we not there? We're talking of debts that we are accumulating. What's that?
And yet it keeps adding, and the continent is unable to keep track.
So at the end of the day, do you think that is what is going to develop Africa? No. So we come back to the point. Africa needs a mental development, and therefore we need to overhaul this present educational system, restructure it to
suit the
context and the realities on the ground. We are not only looking at might be the contents of it, might be to create things. No. Because a lot of us, when I talk like this, people are only thinking of, oh, we need to be able to make our own drones and do that. That's not what makes development. Development must be contextualized. If we want to talk about development and we do not talk about self-development first, development should go spiritual, it should be holistic. There should be the spiritual development, which should be the primary development. Then you can now talk of the mental development. You can now talk of the economic development. You can now talk of the infrastructural development and all that. But we need to begin from the beginning. And that beginning is gaining ourselves. If you don't gain yourself, you can't create any impact around your environment. And that remains the primary part for Africans to take. Mental renewal. So, to structure our curriculums, it should be to build the people. And once the people are built, they are the ones that can build their nation.
Absolutely.
The United Nations does not calculate the wealth of a nation based on the raw materials that the nation has or the money that is found in their bank account. They use three letter words. And what those letters? You have GDP, gross domestic product. And when you look at the word product, the word product is the same word from where productivity is derived. And productivity is a human factor. It is not done by machines. Machines are created by humans even. And so if you want to talk about productivity, you must talk of creativity. And so creativity is the source from which productivity comes. And creativity is a human capacity. And so if we must develop a nation, make it economically empowered, then the people should become the focus. We have to be able to make them creative, make the people productive. And once the people are creative and productive,
it's going to
they directly impact the growth of the nation. The development of the nation will not be something that you remind them to do, because it is in them to be creative and productive. So when we have leaders who do not think the right way, leaders who think only of material, leaders who think of copying and pasting, is we need big houses. The development of Africa should not be related to skyscrapers. It's not skyscrapers that make a people develop. It is not the big machines that we type or use imported from Europe that will make Africa. That is not development.
Africa's development is within the continent.
That is why I said our development is supposed to be contextualized, implying our infrastructure should not be a copied infrastructure from somewhere. What is it that the Africans worked with Africa? You look at our civilization. Our civilization before the European came was ecologically impactful, was very, very should I use the word favorable to the ecology, which implies was friendly, ecologically friendly. And today we see that the same trees that were being protected yesterday are being cut down today to raise skyscrapers. And later on we come back to say, oh, there is global warming, there is... What is all that? The change that we are talking about, the climate change we are talking about, who is creating it? It's man. Because we are destroying the ecology, at the same time struggling to talk of development. You can't talk of development while destroying.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned something about mental restoration as far as the restitution of the African continent is concerned in line with colonial atrocities. And now, when you look at the African continent, especially that in present day, when we say that we're plagued with numerous crises, from insecurity to a host of others, including the debt crisis plaguing Africa. When you look at all this, do you believe that there is with this lack of solidarity? Because you mentioned that if The issue of reparation was tabled from one voice. If Africans could come together as one people to talk about say reparations being brought to the African continent, then we're headed in the right direction. But do you believe that this sudden, or better still, this lack of true solidarity amongst Africans themselves, or better still at the level of the leaders, is what is hindering the restitution from these colonial atrocities?
Like I said earlier, I'll repeat it again. If this project was tabled, let's say African Union and the leaders of Africa are the ones at the forefront asking for reparations,
exactly,
it will have a different impact.
And more weight.
Yes. But since it is just a few individuals who are asking, and might be a group of people who go around asking, the Europeans won't take it serious. And they won't take it serious because they believe that if they yield to one, then they can yield to all. If they accept to do what the 5 are asking, then 100 of them will come. And when the 100 come, maybe the entire continent will soon rise up and say, okay, we need it. So they keep on postponing. The truth is that there will be a time when these things will be dealt with. Let's be sincere about it. Nothing would fall down like that. These things will be handled, even by our great-grandchildren after us, or by our children,
exactly,
or our grandchildren.
Because there's this reawakening across Africa.
Yes, yes. We want Africa to take over its destiny in its hands. And so we do not have the kind of leaders that we expect that should fight for us. And my only prayer is, I wish that it doesn't just end with us talking from the point of, okay, we need these reparations, we need this. We should also take the opportunity to tell our leaders that you have a responsibility to stand for the people.
The people that brought you to power.
For the people, yeah. And not standing for the people just within the continent, wheresoever. You see, I was telling somebody, as an American citizen, if I am found in, let's say, in Belgium, in China, or somewhere in Africa, like say in Cameroon, and something happens, the American government knows that I'm here. They'll ask for my whereabouts, and they are going to follow up about my whereabouts, and they can come to rescue me from where I am.
Yes.
But that's not the situation with African leaders. We see Africans dying every day. Some of them were trapped in Libya. No African leader said anything.
Some in Tunisia.
Some in
when
Tunisia.
We saw the issue of negrophobia.
Voila. No African leader said anything. It is true that might be in the African Union, they say we condemn, we condemn. Condemning is not what we are talking about. You should be able to board a plane, go get your people, bring them back. You don't abandon. Of recent, a young group of young passengers drowned in Mediterranean Sea from Guinea. And I'm just citing a situation when there are millions that have been drowned in that same sea. That question, where are the leaders? Do we have leaders in Africa? Do we have people who think for the good of the people? That's where we have a problem, because even the so-called humanity that we used to have has been drained out of us. You see the impact of colonialism.
In just, sorry, you're just right on, you have a lot to say.
The impact of colonialism is so damaging. Our humanity has been stolen from us to an extent where an African who before who want to protect another human being, irrespective of where they are coming from. We have lost that. It is, if you look at the level of crime wave, you look at the level of inhumanity demonstrated by young Africans today, you start asking the question, where has our humanity gone to? you see somebody is capable of just taking another person's life without the second thought. You see the degree of insolence, you see the degree, you start asking questions. What is happening? But that's the impact of colonialism. Crime wave itself came as a result of colonialism. I want to tell you why. Before in Africa, justice was not something that was served to you in court. No. Just the mindset that if I do this, I'll be taken to the shrine, or might be something. There was, in fact, people lived and life was so beautiful that you couldn't hear that somebody would go and steal somebody's thing. I spent some time visiting the village. I will be shocked at times that people will harvest bunches of plantains and keep them by the roadside for a week. Nobody is coming to touch a bunch from it. Question: what made them not to steal it? What is in that village that will cause these people not from stealing those bunches of plantain? Take those same bunches of plantains and come to the city of Douala and keep them by the road and turn your eyes for the next 30 seconds and
it's
come
history.
So you realize that the more we leave our rural areas into the urban cities where there is much colonial impact, you realize the high level of crime wave that increases in our cities than when you go back to the rural areas. That's why I told you, if our identity is supposed to be developed, then there is need for us to visit the rural areas and develop from there. So the responsibility falls on leadership still. The rise or the fall of a nation depends on the leader.
Now, I was asking earlier on about mental restoration. What parameters, how can Africans go about this issue of mental restoration, and what needs to be done, especially those that had to leave were forced to live with the impacts of some of these colonial atrocities?
I'll come back to say that if you want to, you are asking for the procedure on how to bring this state of mental
yeah, because I would like to link that with when people are taken with arms, for instance, they go through a process of rehabilitation.
Yeah.
In this case, what can really be done, especially as Africa is fighting for its own independence?
It always begins with a psychological there's a psychological evaluation that takes place.
Yes.
After the psychological evaluation, then you know the impact that the situation created
and how grave it is.
How grave it is. Then from there, you need to step in now to begin a psychological work. So it always begins with psychology, which means it is the mind first. That's why I said if we have to do it, our educational system needs to be targeting. You see, children who are born in this generation who did not have direct impact with colonialism think differently. They don't see the impact, but it is transferred to them genealogically, but they don't even realize it. The mindset is transferred to them from our environment. They don't realize it. So they might not have been in slavery, but they are still enslaved and they don't see it. So you talk to them, they'll tell you, that was long ago, but it still impacts them directly. But they don't realize it. Okay, just imagine a child that was born, and let's say in the 60s, that was when colonialism just ended. They were not born directly under that particular colonial power. But what happened? They faced the effects. Has that mindset changed from then to now? No. the mindset still remains, which implies those who came to give you independence knew very well
that we were not capable.
That they were not capable because of the mindset in which they have. And that mindset is being continued from generation to generation. And the funny thing is that it is very subtle in a way where you don't realize that you are affected. And that is the reason why the people are suffering, but they don't know that they are suffering.
So when you look at Africa, given we've been discussing this for a while and we're gradually coming to the end, but then when you look at Africa, you've cited some of the lapses which do exist as far as getting this, or Africans freeing their minds from the impact of this colonial atrocities which was being imposed on the African continent. But then, how can Africa get to a point, we're looking at the African Union, sometimes we criticize, but away from those criticisms, when you look at Africa, how can Africans get to a point where they are much more united, where they can be able to say, okay, this is what we want for our people, this is going to bring about the betterment of the continent. How do we get there? When you look at where Africa is now, do you think there is hope? And of course, how can Africa, step by step, how can Africa get to that point? A point of realization of its self-worth?
Primarily, there's hope because I'm speaking what I'm speaking here.
That is true.
And I believe that there is much that can be done. The damaged goods, which we are, as I'll put it, could be restored. And the means of restoring it, I will still come back to tell us, we might be talking about the unity of Africa, unity of Africa, unity of Africa. It has always been my language. Africa needs to unite. Africa needs to unite. Africa needs to unite. The unity of Africa necessarily might not be to create the so-called United States of Africa that a lot of people are yearning for. But if we could have something that is similar to the Confederation of the Westerners, which is today called the European Union, it will have an impact. I think we discussed on this last week here, and I said if there is need for them to actually get to that place where they can create positive impact, then there is need for the member states of the African Union to give in
part of
their sovereignty to the African Union.
Yes.
Whereas the African Union needs to be able to create a unique currency for the entire continent to give the African Union the economic autonomy that it deserves for it to have the say over the member states.
Yes.
And if that does not happen, trust me, we will remain being tossed to and fro like we are being tossed right now, where Russia will need to call us to come for a meeting. We'll leave. The United States will call us for a meeting. The French will call us for a meeting. China will call us for a meeting. You see, I'm citing nations here, calling the continent for a nation. French, Africa summit. America, at least the United States is a continent itself, plus Canada involved. At least we can have something to do. Say it can be an equal. But the truth is, in the entire United States, we have one president.
Exactly.
What is happening with Africa?
Africa, that has always been the question.
China has a population of 1.2 billion people, which means it has the same size of Africa. I mean, when it comes to population, not the size of the territory. Almost the same number of people. India has the same population as Africa. But they have one president, one leader, one prime minister. What is happening with Africa? Can't we decide to say, okay, the problem is not the power anymore. The problem is our development. let's give up these things and build a unity front. Like I said last time on this here platform, a people without economic independence remain slave wheresoever they are. And that is why, if Africans think that we can have these multi-currencies that we have in Africa, we call them money. It's not money. Those pieces of papers and rubbish can never develop us. And that's why we need to say, okay, we give up this, we come up. See, African Union, you have responsibility to establish a currency that gives African Union in the first place autonomy, and it gives it power, because when you have the economy, you have the money. Switzerland might have the Swiss franc, but they also use the euro. The Swiss franc is just for those in Switzerland. Yes. The euro is across the borders for you to do trade across. That if you want to keep your naira in Nigeria, you want to keep your
Ghana cedis,
you want to keep your kwasha, your Ghana cedi, or whatsoever, you can keep it. But as long as you have, I don't know the name that the African Union might want to give, which the African Union is the one having the central reserve. You know what? Automatically, the African Union become empowered. They have economic say over your nation. That gives them the power. Automatically, they have the political will given to them. And when that happens, the person who sits as the leader of the African Union will have a lot of say, where if something is to happen in Cameroon and they see that it's not for the good of the people, they will say stop it, and you will stop it. Because at that moment, we have a parliament, a Pan-African parliament that speaks for the African people. At that moment, we restructure and build.
There are several institutions within the AU.
The so-called African Parliament today, Pan-African Parliament, is useless.
And there is an African court, let's not forget.
Yeah, the African court. The African Development Bank.
Okay.
With all those things, how can we have an African Development Bank without African currency?
Hopefully, Africa is going to get to that point where it can be able to sustain its own self. But then we're already at the end of today's edition, but I'll not leave a view without getting a few words as far as how can Africa move forward. But then, when you see Africa is recovering, or better still, Africa has recovered and it's yet to move past the colonial atrocities. Like you mentioned, some of the impacts are still so much evident in today's present-day society. With all this involved, as Africa is moving forward, what suggestions can you bring to the table in just 2 minutes, please?
Certainly, I've given all the suggestions that are needed for Africa to move forward. What I might be adding here right now is, it is time for us to get serious, and it's time for us to learn to realize that if we are where we are the reason why we are here. The truth is, we have accepted that we have an impact that has come from the West. They have impacted us wrongly, but we need to also awaken. So self-realization remains the path. The African people get aware, know and accept that you have a problem. Because not identifying a problem means you will never have a solution. Exactly. But accepting that you have a problem, that's the beginning of a solution. Once you identify the problem, that's the second phase of the solution. And once you identify the problem, now you can start looking for solutions. And we have been able to identify the problem of the African man, which is mental problem. We are psychologically impacted wrongly, and we have a life that we need to build. And if we have to go out of it, then we need to go back to mental awareness. We need to get to a place where we awaken out of this sleep where we are, truly come out to ourselves and say, okay, wow, I've been living another person's life. I've been living in the matrix. So start living your life when you already know you have a life. So that comes back, and I'll end by saying that Africa, we need to be awakened. mentally, we have been given political independence, but we do not have mental independence. Until we are mentally free, we cannot actually push forward. If we are still being dictated upon from Europe through our education, we are still being dictated upon through the way we think and do things and see life. We think that the best way of life is European way of life. That is already telling you are colonially damaged. Your mind is damaged. And so we need independent minds to start looking for ways to solve this problem. So awaken, get to renew your mind, and like Bob Marley said, what Africans need is what? Mental freedom. We need mental freedom for us to be able to think freely, and for us, because you cannot philosophize freely if you don't have a free mind, and you can't develop your country or your continent if you don't have a free mind. So let's go back to that point.
Let Africa get back to that point. Africa needs to advocate for mental freedom and, of course, advocate equally for economic freedom. Thank you, immensely, Prof, for taking our time to be with us this day.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity as well.
Just to note that Professor AKUHMBOM Anthony is a Pan-Africanist and the author of Africa's Dilemma, People on a Crossroads to Choosing an Identity, amongst others. Ladies and gentlemen, it's on that note that we shall be drawing down the curtains of today's edition of Talking Point over For You Media Africa. Thank you for staying through with us. We believe you loved, you learned a lot from today's exchange. Meanwhile, we'll leave you in company of our numerous programs. Bye-bye.